Hello, today we're going to be looking at another part of section 10.5, which is all about the distance formula. The distance formula is a big formula that allows us to figure out how far apart 2 points are on the coordinate plane. When you're looking at a graph, for example, if you take a look at the picture that I made on the right here, if I want to know how far apart these 2 points are, I cannot simply count the boxes on the graph because my line is diagonal, so I need a different way to figure out its length, hence the distance formula. When you take a look at this big formula, it's a giant square root of, and then inside of the formula, we plug in the 2 points that are at the each end of the line that we're trying to find the length of. Here we have our 2 points. They are called x1, y1, x2, y2. Remember, that just means the first x number, the first y number, the second x number, and the second y number. When we plug into our distance formula, we subtract the x coordinates, x2 minus x1, and then square that, plus subtract the y coordinates, y2 minus y1, and square that. So for every one of these questions, we're going to be finding the distance between 2 points by plugging into this formula and then simplifying. If you take a look at question number 1, we're asked to find the distance between the points 9, 7, and 1, 1. So label your points, especially while you're new at this. It's much easier if you show your coordinates x1, y1, x2, y2. And then distance is equal to, make yourself a big square root. I like to set up the question first, or set up the formula. So I make the big square root, my 2 sets of parentheses, squared, the plus sign in between, and then I'm going to fill in the actual numbers. So on the formula it says in the first parenthesis, do x2, so here that's 1, minus x1, which is 9. In the second set of parentheses, we subtract the y coordinates. So y2 is 1 minus y1, which is 7. Order of operations, we're going to essentially work from the inside out. So inside of each set of parentheses now, do the subtraction. So in the first one, 1 minus 9 is negative 8. In the second parenthesis, 1 minus 7 is negative 6. Now square each of those numbers. So negative 8 squared is 64, plus negative 6 squared is 36. 64 and 36 is 100. And the square root of 100 is 10. So the distance between these 2 points is 10 units. Take a look now at question number 3. I'm going to skip over to question number 3. Again, we're going to label our coordinates, x1, y1, x2, and y2. Notice that these points have a lot of negative signs. Be very careful when you plug into the distance formula, especially when you have a lot of negatives. So again, I'm going to set up my formula. Distance is the big square root. I set up my parentheses. Each one gets squared, added together. Then fill into your formula. So the first parenthesis is for the x's. So x2 is negative 6 minus x1 is negative 1. y2 is 0 minus y1 is negative 4. So this is where you have to be very careful with your signs. In the first parenthesis, negative 6 minus negative 1, or negative 6 plus 1, is negative 5. In the second parenthesis, 0 plus 4 is 4. Now I square each number. So negative 5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16. 25 and 16 is 41. You can either leave your answer as a simplified radical, and 41 is actually simplified. There is no perfect square that goes into it. Or you can type that into your calculator and find that the distance is about 6.4 units. Okay, I'm going to skip the other questions on the front here and flip over to the back. There's one other type of question for the distance formula, and that's where you are given the distance between 2 points. So you have your 2 points and you actually know the distance, but one of your coordinates is missing. So if you take a look at the back at the question number 1, it says here are 2 points, 1, 1, and A, 1. The distance between those 2 points is 4, and our job is to solve for A. So I'm going to, again, label all of my coordinates. So here's x1, y1, x2, y2. And I'm going to plug my points into the distance formula, just like we did for the last 2 questions. So I set up my 2 parentheses. Each one gets squared. They get added together. The first parenthesis is for my x values. So x2 is A minus x1 is 1. Y2 is 1 minus y1 is 1. Here's where it's a little bit different from the last 2 questions. I also know the distance. When I calculate the space between those 2 points, I already know the answer. It should be 4. So I'm also going to plug that into my formula. Okay, then I'm going to clean up whatever I can underneath of the parentheses. So A minus 1, I can't combine together, but I can combine 1 minus 1, which is 0. So this becomes just 0. Now I have 4 equals the square root of A minus 1 squared. Okay, the next step is to get rid of our square root. In order to do that, we know squaring and square rooting cancel out. So now I'm going to square both sides of this equation to get rid of my big square root. So I have 16 equals just what's underneath of the square root sign. So underneath I have A minus 1 squared. Okay, now again I have this squared term. Squaring and square rooting cancel. So I'm going to square root both sides. So now the square root of 16 is 4. The square root of A minus 1 squared is just A minus 1. When we talk about square roots, so far we've only discussed the positive square root, but remember, every number actually has 2 square roots, the positive version and the negative version. So the square root of 16 is 4, but it's also negative 4. Here you have to have both of those solutions because they're actually going to be 2 different values for A. Now I say, okay, either A minus 1 was equal to the positive answer, 4, or A minus 1 may have equaled the negative answer, negative 4. Then I solve, so add 1 to both sides. a equals 5. Add 1 to both sides in the other equation. A equals negative 3. There are two different solutions for these questions because the point 1, 1 back at the beginning from the actual problem is 4 spaces away from 5, 1, but it's also 4 spaces away from negative 3, 1. Okay, your homework tonight is to go back and do any of the questions that I did not do off of this note sheet. So on the front, you're doing numbers 2, 4, 5, 6. And on the back, you're going to do the last two questions, 2 and 3. Have a great day.